Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our regular District 73 education and training sessions. Tonight, we're focusing on business meetings and parliamentary process. We have some wonderful speakers lined up for you, some very knowledgeable speakers lined up for you. Later on, we will be hearing also from Matt Kinsey, our Toastmasters International President. So do be online for that one. I've put the agenda into the chat. If you don't have it, I'll put it in there again in a few minutes when probably more people will turn up. But for now, let us begin with our first speaker. Our first speaker this evening is Vincent Camilleri. Vincent Camilleri, DTM. Vince has been a member of the Williamstown Club since 2003. He's also been a member of Satdiavo Communicators, Aero Speakers, and is an honorary member of the Malta Toastmasters Club. Vince's first club was the Melbourne Club from 1981 to 1988. Now, in his professional life, he spent the last 20 years as a self-employed finance broker where the skills acquired in Toastmasters were used running seminars to help build his business. He is a keen runner and a musician, and Vince has 4 children. And now I will hand you over to Vince Camilleri, who is at the moment, our parliamentarian for District 73. Over to you, Vince.
Thank you, Graham. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the invite to be here today. The topic I'm speaking about is a fairly dry topic. I'd rather talk about long distance running or maybe percussion, and I could actually demonstrate quite a bit of percussion, but I'm here to speak about parliamentary procedures. Where do I start? So I'll start by telling you a little bit about myself and my Toastmaster journey. And I need to tell you that because parliamentary procedures has been a major part of that Toastmaster journey. I first encountered Toastmasters in 1979 when I was working for the federal government in the Department of Social Security. And I was on a training course, public speaking training course. And we had a couple of Toastmasters along. The Toastmasters were Ray Thatcher and Tony Jessup, really outstanding Toastmasters. They were at that time distinguished Toastmasters, and I think both of them, when they attended, had already been district governors. So they gave us a presentation. They actually took us through a table topic session, and they were really impressive. And I remember on that day, I made up my mind that, yes, I think I would love to join Toastmasters, but things got in the way, children got in the way, and I procrastinated, and I didn't join till 1981 when I made that phone call and attended my first meeting at Melbourne Toastmasters. They met at the private dining room at Melbourne University. Beautiful place with very high ceilings and tapestries on the wall, carpet in this prestigious university. And we had a 3-hour meeting with 3 beverages and 3 meals. We believed in the rule of 3. And it was an all-male club, the only club in the CBD at the time. And there were some outstanding speakers there. What was outstanding about the Melbourne Club, as I said, it's a 3-hour meeting. They had a 45-minute business session. And everyone had to do the business session. The Toastmaster didn't do the business session, neither did the president. Everyone took a turn at doing that. And it was truly a good learning experience because they tested you as chairman. I can remember motions of dissent from the chairman's ruling, let's break up into a committee of the whole so we can have a free-flowing discussion. I move that I move that this speaker no longer be heard. Motions like that were all bandied about, and it tested you as a chairman. So I stuck with that club for about 8 to 9 years, but as we moved along, we had 4 children. So in about 1989, I had to quit to become a Uber driver ahead of time for my 4 children who were starting to grow up and go to swimming and ballet and music and you name it. But I have to say that parliamentary procedures was a fantastic skill that I got at Melbourne Toastmasters. And it was fantastic because it taught me how to chair a meeting. It taught me how to behave in a committee. And in particular, I remember being, in my job, I was a manager, so I needed to lead teams, and I needed to be able to speak like a leader. And the leadership training I got, especially the chairmanship training I got, was second to none from the Melbourne Club. I remember going to my 3 sons. My 3 sons were going to attend a new school. And I remember going to that school the very first night. And I said to my then wife that I'm going to go along and see what's happening. I want to meet the principal. And if I can, I want to get involved, because it was a school in town. I worked in town and the 3 sons were going to school in town. So I went along, and there were about 150 people in the room. And the principal said, okay, we need a board. We need to elect a board. We've got to have parents on the board, and we've got to have a parent as the chairperson. Anyhow, I put my hand up to be on the board, and I got elected. I had to give a little speech, got elected. And after the meeting was over, the principal did ask us all to go into the principal's room, just have a short discussion. This is the new board members. And I remember the principal asking us, or saying to us, thank you for volunteering. Now we need to elect a chairman of the board. And what I noticed at the time is that it was just like table topics or Harkmaster time. It was all eyes down. I could tell by body language. I was an expert by then to read body language. I could tell no one wanted to take on the chairmanship. But I kept my eyes up because I knew I could do it. I'd been to Toastmasters and I volunteered. So for the time that my 3 sons attended that school, I was the chairman of the board at Simmons Catholic College. And it was a great experience. I never had any doubt. And I had the same experience when my daughter attended her college here in Altona. I again joined that board. I was the deputy chair of the board. I was the chairman of the finance committee, and all because I'd been in Toastmasters, because I'd learned something about parliamentary procedures. Now, the word parliamentary procedures is a highfalutin term. I'd rather use meeting procedures, because in those type of settings, you will have motions, you have voting, you have discussion, you have debates. So you are using the meat and potatoes of parliamentary procedures. You may not use all the terms, but you certainly have motions, you have amendments, you have procedural motions as well as substantive motions. Again, when I left my employment with Social Security, I became self-employed as a finance broker, and I was in business for 20 years. And so I got involved in the local Traders Association. Again, I joined that association, and I got elected to deputy president of the Traders Association. It was a president who used to chair all the meetings, and at times he did have a bit of difficulty with that, some difficulty. And one day I said to him, look, I'm a Toastmaster. I'm experienced at chairing meetings. How about you be the president and be as presidential as you want during the meetings, and I chair the meetings and I'll defer to you. And so for the last 13 years of my professional life, I chaired the Traders Association meetings. Again, what I found is the skills that I got enabled me to chair those meetings confidently. And to your two things as the chairman, when you're in meetings, and I will get on to some technical stuff, but when you're in meetings as the chairman, you're actually teaching other people, if they don't know how to behave in a meeting or react in a meeting, you're teaching them how to behave. You're teaching them the language in particular. And that's what I found in the boards that I sat on, is that I used, I mean, we always had motions. I called for motions. I called for seconders. We had votes. I had to teach them the language. And what I found was a lot of people are a little bit coy about using the language, a little bit shy. They might find it a little bit officious, and they tend to stand back a little bit. So as the chairman, I found myself drawing people in, teaching them the language. And after a while, what I found in the boards that I was in is that people knew exactly what was going to happen. And so what invariably happens when you are the chair is that you teach people about how you, as a participant in this committee, how you are to behave. You're to get involved in a discussion. You've got a vote, and so there's behaviours that you've got to teach people as chairman. And what I found, and this is a very important point, is that as time went on, the boards that I was on got more efficient because we all learnt the language. And once we were all speaking the same language, I remember when I first started school, I couldn't speak English because I just migrated out from Malta as a little boy. And I found it difficult in my first few months at school because I couldn't speak the language. When we all speak the same language, we become more efficient and we become more productive. So that was my history with the Toastmasters and getting on boards and being a chairman. I found the Toastmaster training was excellent, especially the training I got at the Melbourne Club. So what I might do now, look, I did say that I was going to discuss parliamentary procedures. I'm just going to go through some things. I didn't know how experienced the people were going to be on this, in this meeting. So I just prepared some very basic presentation. I've got one presentation that I've got, just a PowerPoint that I borrowed from elsewhere, and I'll run through that. Don't be afraid to ask me questions if you want to ask me questions, or if you want to save your questions to the end, that's fine as well. So I might run a PowerPoint now, but I can't speak highly enough. And if I can add one point, is that in my experience, I've been in 5 clubs. In my experience, most Toastmasters don't take easily to parliamentary procedures. I don't know whether it's the language might be a bit officious, or there's a reluctance to use it at first, and you have to encourage people to use it. That's what I found in my experience with new people who come in. And if you have a new board with new members on it, a new committee, you've got to encourage them to use the language, and you've got to role model using the language. Moving of motions and taking of votes and making decisions, all of those things, experienced members have to role model. That's so important. Okay, I might just go to a presentation now. Okay, so I'm just going to go through some items that relate to parliamentary procedures. So basically, when we ask for a vote, all votes are equal, one person, one vote, and sometimes we vote based on positions. And sometimes people hold multiple positions that have got voting power, and so they might have more than one vote, but all single votes are equal. a minority has a right to express opinions. We're lucky we live in a democracy, and whether you're in the majority or minority, you can express your opinion and express it quite openly. And there is the right of fair debate. Again, you know, if a meeting is chaired well, people feel that they can express themselves openly and freely. And of course, we live in a democracy. The majority rules, not the minority rules. And justice and courtesy for all. We try to make sure we create an environment that where people can make decisions and we can be courteous to each other. So just meeting terms. So we all know what a quorum is. It's
sorry, Vince.
Yes.
Just we can't see anything at the moment.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Oh, okay. I haven't shared it. I beg your pardon. Thank you, Graham, for telling me. I forgot to share it. All right, I'll share screen. I apologise for that.
That's all right.
Yeah, I've just can you see that?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Agenda.
Okay, so I explained quorum. You know what an agenda is? An agenda is a terrific document because it tells the participants what we're going to do. It is a control over time, and it also has, if you have agendas like we have at one of the clubs that I belong to, we write the motions on there so that there's no problems about the motions themselves, about how to put the motion, okay, and vote. So a motion is a proposed resolution before it has been adopted. Can you hang on 1 second? I've got someone outside mowing the lawn. Just 1 second, I'll just go tell them to go around the back.
Oh, there's nothing as predictable as a Zoom meeting.
A perfect opportunity to start thinking of those wonderful questions and putting them in the chat box.
Sorry, I found it a little bit difficult to talk with the mow going. Yeah, so a motion is a proposed resolution before it has been adopted. And of course, the resolution is a formal determination by an organised meeting. We often resolve to do something before we turn it into a motion. And a substantive motion. Of course, these are, a substantive motion is one ordering something to be done, authorising some past or proposed action, expressing the meeting's opinion in regard to some subject, or otherwise dealing with the organisation's general activities. This is what usually lands onto our standing orders, or maybe into our constitution as well. And a procedural motion is a motion that deals it deals with the meeting, basically, with the conduct of the meeting. And an amendment is an alteration or proposed alteration to the terms of a motion designed to improve the motion without contradicting it. So just in terms of, motions, the first thing to do is to gain attention. If you want to move a motion, is to raise your hand or stand up and draw attention, the chairperson's attention. Be recognised by the chairman, who will call you out to raise your motion or to speak. So the motion is usually moved by the person who's proposing the motion and will explain the motion. The chairman then, if the chairman accepts the motion, will call for a seconder and invite the seconder to speak or to reserve their right to speak later on. So to balance the debate, there'll be a speaker against the motion, a speaker for the motion, and then the mover's right of reply. And then, of course, the vote is cast. So this is basically schematically the procedure that I've just outlined, with a member moving a motion, a seconder seconding it. So the motion is debated, but then someone may move an amendment. And with amendments, they basically move in exactly the same way as a motion, in that a seconder is called for, it's debated with speakers for and against, and the amendment itself is dealt with separately from the motion. And if the amendment is carried, it is incorporated into the motion, and the debate continues on with a changed motion. But if the amendment is lost, the original motion continues on until it's finalised. Well, so just as far as motions are concerned, we all know, and we've all seen this, not all of us, most of us I imagine have, that it commences with that, must be specific and unambiguous, must be in the first person, must not be in the first person, of course. No I or we in the motion itself, must be in one sentence or can be in parts, may incorporate an explanation. Now, must not attempt to revive a previous motion that's been recently raised, must be proposed and seconded to ensure that we understand that there's popular support for the motion, can be amended, may be altered by leave, and leave just means that the whole assembly approves that the motion be taken out of the meeting and amended. So that's 100%, must vote for it. Gives the right of reply to the mover and should preferably be in writing. I would not accept a motion that's not in writing, because as you debate, as you debate a motion, it's quite easy to get confused at what was the original wording, what was the original intention. So I would always insist that it's in writing and may be rescinded. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask them. So amendments, they basically mirror motions. They must commence with that, must be specific and ambiguous, relevant to the motion, and don't change, the tone and tenet of the motion. Must be within the scope of the motion, must not contradict the motion, and may not attempt to revive a motion that's already been defeated. Must be proposed and seconded, and must be moved after the motion is seconded. May not be amended. So you can't do an amendment to an amendment. May be altered by leave. May be altered by, may be withdrawn by leave, gives no right of reply, and is preferably be submitted in writing. Sorry, how long do I have, Kevin? If you can just let me know.
Sorry, another 5 minutes, Vince.
Another 5 minutes. Okay. Oh, I didn't realise. Okay. Here's a motion that all male members wear attire to the next meeting. So here we have an amendment where the word male, that the word male be deleted. So it's a deletion of a term. Amendment number 2, that the words the next meeting be replaced with the words all meetings. And this is number 3. I can't exactly see it because it's too far down. So I'm sorry about that. Now, stages of a meeting, and I'm not going to say too much about this because I know that Bob's going to come and speak about meetings. So a meeting is declared open. Apologies are usually called for, and apologies are accepted, or so there's a motion to accept the apologies. The minutes are usually read, or it's cleared with the other members whether they've read the minutes, and then a motion for the minutes to be confirmed. And then a business arising from the minutes is called for. Correspondence is tabled, business arising from the correspondence, and so there's a motion for the correspondence to be received. Reports, I've called for, and again there's a motion for reports, for adoption of reports. Motions on notice, and of course they're tabled, moved and seconded, and then debated as we just discussed, and just general business then. So that's a typical meeting, that's a typical agenda, and then the close. Categories of procedural motions. Motions disposing of business in a permanent fashion. Motions disposing of business in a temporary fashion, and other procedural motions. So the motions that dispose of business in a permanent fashion, the closure, and that is a motion which it reads that the motion be now put. In other words, the person who's moving that motion is requesting the chairman to put the motion to the gathering, and the motion is moved and to be voted on. And so the chairman would put the motion and call for that one. There is no seconder required, and the chairman can refuse that. He's the seconder, he or she is the seconder. Can refuse that. The next one is proceed to the next business, and with this one, it would close. It would mean that the motion would be lost. It wouldn't be discussed anymore. So a seconder is required for it. And so this one is the previous question, that the motion. Yeah, this one is the previous question, that the question be not now put. And with that one, you need a seconder for that one as well. So again, and if that motion is carried, if that motion is carried, there would be a further debate on the original motion. If it's lost, the original motion wouldn't be debated any further. So procedural motions type B, these basically dispose of the business in a temporary fashion. So a reference motion is referring a motion to a committee for that this matter be referred to committee. It's referring the matter to a committee for further consideration. That the debate be adjourned. In other words, that the meeting, that the debate in the meeting be stopped for the time being for whatever reason. Maybe there's more information or someone else is going to speak about it later on. That the meeting do now adjourn. In other words, that the meeting will be closing and will be resuming at another time, and that the tabling motion, the question lie on the table. And so for those four, they're just that will get rid of the motion temporarily. Procedural motions that limit debate. I'm sorry, did I? Let me have a look soon. No. Procedural motion, the closure, that the motion that limit debate, proceed to the next one. No, I won't talk about those right now, actually. So with these motions that is going to stop debate, the chairman has got the discretion to not accept that the question be now put and continue on with the debate. And the other one, the question be not now put, again, the chairman has got the discretion to not accept that if there's not been I'm sorry. So the chairman need not accept, and the seconder is required. Okay, look, I'll stop there because I've got the red lights and I'm trying to hurry too much. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take questions later on in question time.
Great. Thank you very much, Vince, for sharing this with us. Just temporarily share that. There we go. Okay, thank you very much, Vince, for sharing that with us. If you have any questions for Vince, maybe put them in the chat and we can go through them a bit later on. Now we move to our second speaker of the evening, who is Bob Kirchner, DTM. So Bob joined Toastmasters in 1977 and has held all club and many district leadership positions since, including the founding district director of District 90. He was named District 70 Toastmaster of the Year in 2012 and received a Toastmasters International Presidential Citation in 2018. In 2013, he was awarded an Order of Australia Medal for services to Toastmasters and to country music, having worked for many years in the Australian country music and radio industries through his various involvements in his hometown of Tamworth, Australia's country music capital. You may have heard of Tamworth. Among a number of activities and projects with his wife Leanne, he currently publishes Australia's leading country music new website, the Country Music Bulletin, and operates the all-Australian country music digital radio station, Capital Country Radio, and stages the annual Australian Country Music People's Choice Awards. Sounds like Bob has a lot to do. He's been parliamentarian for District 70 and District 90, and is currently parliamentarian for District 69. He developed a lasting interest in meeting procedure after joining Toastmasters and also after watching the now classic John Cleese educational video, Meetings, Bloody Meetings. I remember that one well myself. It's a fantastic and still relevant one. Please welcome Bob Kirchner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to try something new in this little presentation. I hope it works all right. Bit like Vince, doing something new. Bit of a test. Now, I'm here tonight really to talk to you about making meeting procedure fun to learn. And I think going on from what Vince said in his presentation, there are a lot of elements of meeting procedure, and I agree. I think we should call it meeting procedure, not parliamentary procedure, even though technically it is parliamentary procedure. There are a lot of elements in there that confuse people and put them off the idea of meeting procedure and being involved in meeting procedure. And I think that's a shame, because the message that I learned really early in the piece from my involvement, from listening to John Cleese as well, of course, but particularly following Nick Renton, the late Nick Renton, and his book, The Guide to Meetings and Organisations, I've realised that you can actually have fun when you're using meeting procedure. And I want to try and encourage you, as a part of my little bit tonight, to think about that, particularly in your club, if you don't do a lot of meeting procedure, if you don't have a lot of business sessions in your Toastmasters clubs. And again, a bit like Vince, I have seen when I first joined Toastmasters, meeting procedure and business meetings were a big part of many, many Toastmasters clubs. And I think over the years, that has changed dramatically to the point where I think there are now quite a lot of clubs that don't have business sessions at all. And I think that's a shame, because certainly from my point of view, when I joined Toastmasters, I really took to meeting procedure, and I probably took to meeting procedure because I preferred to do that than make speeches, because I was so nervous. But anyway, that's another story. I think the skills and the benefits you can get from having a good understanding of a meeting procedure and being able to be effectively involved in meetings is enormous. It's as much a value as our normal public speaking skills. that we all do develop, of course, through Toastmasters, and that plays a part in running meetings as well and being involved in meetings. But I think we can benefit a lot more as Toastmasters in our clubs if we practice more meeting procedure. And I'll come to that a little bit later, and I'll give you some good examples as to why I think it's a good idea to be able to do that. Now, using meeting procedure effectively, you can, in fact, have an efficient meeting rather than a meeting like we're seeing on the screen at the moment. I'm sure we've all been to meetings that are just totally out of control. And I'll give you one example of how people really expect meetings to be like this. When I was involved in a Rotary Club, a local Rotary Club here, I was given the portfolio of vocational service. For those of you in Rotary know, that's all about jobs and vocations. And in our town, we had a careers market. And among the service clubs in the town, we used to rotate who would actually be the chair of that. And the year that I was doing vocational service in my Rotary Club, I was the club was going to be the chair of that committee running the careers market. So I called a meeting and brought all the service club people together, and everyone came along and was very happy and friendly. We sat down to our meeting. I had been in Toastmasters for probably about 10 or 12 years at this stage, so I'd got a pretty good handle on meeting procedure. And I sat down and I declared the meeting. And the only thing we had to do at this meeting, by the way, was confirm a date. That was all we had to do. So we sat down, I opened the meeting and did a couple of little niceties as you do in a meeting. And then I got someone to move a motion about a date. We'd all had previous discussions about that, so it was nothing new. We moved the motion was seconded. There was a little bit of debate, a couple of little tweaks to the motion, and then we put the motion and it was carried. And I closed the business session, closed the meeting, and it was like 5 minutes. And everyone was sitting around the table aghast because what's going on here? We normally meet for about an hour and talk about this, you know? So that's just an example of how you can get away from having meetings like we're seeing on the screen at the moment and having efficient meetings. And it is true in everything that we do, and certainly for meeting procedure, that the more you know as an individual, like public speaking, the more skills you develop in public speaking, the more confidence you get. And I think what we see in meeting procedure with many people who say, oh, can't be involved in meetings, I don't really want to know about that. It is because they don't have the knowledge and they haven't had the practice. And I think that's a big shame, as I said earlier, because just with a little more practice, and maybe even a lot more practice, many, many more of our Toastmasters can be more confident with their involvement in meetings and being able to chair meetings and being able to be effective members of meetings. And when I do educational presentations on meeting procedure, I always say that that is one of the most important things for us as individuals to consider, to be able to participate effectively in a meeting just as a floor member. Certainly, it's good to be involved as a chair or a particular officer bearer in the organisation that you're involved in, whether it's Toastmasters or somewhere else. But as an effective member, that's what we really need in cases where we might not have effective chairs of a meeting. And we've all seen that, I'm sure. And of course, we all know that what we're talking about in Toastmasters is transferable skills. And we can all have, I think in my experience, and I can encourage you, I can assure you, by getting a bit more involved in meeting procedure and practicing, that you will have more fun because you won't be worried about not knowing what's going on or what something means or what you should do next. You will have more confidence, and it will be a much more enjoyable experience in the Toastmasters environment at least. But the real benefit, of course, comes when you're going outside the Toastmasters clubs and you're involved in a meeting which is not necessarily a friendly meeting. And there might be a motion or a particular idea that's being debated that you really, really want to say something about, get your message across. Not only will your public speaking skills come to the fore in that environment, but your knowledge of how a meeting works can be extremely beneficial as well, particularly if you've got a chair who's trying to bulldoze the particular issue or not doing things properly. You having the confidence to be able to stick your hand up, stand up and stick your hand up and say, point of order, Madam Chair or Mr. Chair, and bring things back under control. They are very, very valuable skills indeed to have. So I think if I can encourage all of the people here tonight and anyone else you come in contact with in any Toastmasters club to reinstitute, if they haven't already, if they don't already run business sessions in their Toastmasters clubs, and as I say, I think there's quite a lot who don't, that to actually do that. Because having fun is really, we go back to Ralph Smedley, our founder, who says we learn best in moments of enjoyment. It's absolutely the same for learning meeting procedure. And many people probably don't think of that because they have that lack of confidence. They think, oh, it's just a boring old meeting and we don't really want to know what's going on and we don't want to know what the point is and what's this previous question thing, which I'll come back to in a moment with a second. So people don't get that. They can have fun, and I encourage you to develop that within your clubs. There's a few ways you can do that. And we might even get an opportunity to do it tonight if we have time. So I did mention before Nick Renton. Most of us here, if we are in Australasia, would be aware of Nick Renton, who really wrote the Bible for meeting procedure for most Toastmasters clubs and districts in this part of the world. I know there have been a few little changes since we lost Nick a few years ago, quite a few years ago. But the thing about Nick Renton and his book, for anyone who hasn't read it, I know for those of you who have read it or browsed it, it really is a common sense publication, absolute common sense. It's written in a very user-friendly manner. And the thing that you get when you read Renton's, or when you peruse Renton's and you get into some of the parts of Renton's that you might do if you don't read the whole book, and this is the message I want to also get home tonight, is that everything in meeting procedure, certainly according to Nick, and that's the experience we've had in this part of the world, is based on logic. He very much explains the fact, and you get the fact that everything, even though it might not seem the case, even with the previous question, every single thing in meeting procedure has a reason, has a logic. And a lot of people don't understand that. They just think that there's something crazy going on here and what's the point of doing that? And if you've got a meeting which is running efficiently and effectively, where a chair can maybe explain, as Vince was saying, it's a chairman role can be very, very important in making sure that people learn more about meeting procedure. They can explain maybe something which is a little bit dicey, and rather than just going over it and not thinking about it, explain in brief what the previous question is, or why you're repeating a motion, or why you can only have one amendment. I think those sorts of things are very important. So a logic, everything that we have in meeting procedure is based on logic, certainly as far as we are concerned. Everything makes sense. And that's something that we should all understand as we go through. And if you get to the point of bringing more business sessions and having those practice sessions within your club, you will too get to learn that this is absolutely right. And I'm going to give you a couple of very clear examples in a moment to show you what the logic is in some of those things that maybe not logical, or we think aren't logical. So the first thing, and I know in the District 73, I read some of the documentation that's always recommended people stand while they speak. Well, some people say, why do you want to do that? Why should I stand? I can just put my hand up. Well, it's a practice thing, like we do in public speaking in our Toastmasters clubs. Get into the habit of standing to speak, standing to raise your hand, standing to, as Vince said, gain the attention of the chair. Now, in a meeting of 12 people or even 20 in a Toastmasters club, yeah, what's the point? Get into the habit of doing it, because when you go to that important meeting where you want to get your point across and be recognised, the first thing you're going to do is stand and raise your hand. And the chair is going to say, oh, there's somebody who wants to speak. And if you just sit down at that meeting of 200 people and you put your hand up, the chairman's probably not even going to see you. So that's a very logical reason for doing something that some people might say, yeah, what do we want to wait for that for? The second example I want to use is the point of having a seconder, and probably a lot of people don't think about this. They just see it as a part of meeting procedure, the meeting procedure that doesn't always make sense to them. Because someone puts forward an idea, what's the point of going through this process of having someone second the motion? That's a bit crazy. You know, we're all used to it. Probably most people in this room tonight are probably used to it. But for people who aren't, they might be a little thing that runs through the back of their mind. So the logic, again, I go back to the logic, and I'm demonstrating the logic here. The logic of having a seconder for a motion in a meeting where we want to try and be efficient and run on time is to make sure that at least one other person in the room wants to discuss the motion. And you as the chair, looking at whether you get a seconder or not, you can say, well, I'm sorry, we only have one person wants to talk about that, so I think let's not waste our time. Thank you for bringing up the idea, but it's obvious that no one else wants to talk about this idea, so the motion will lapse because there's no seconder to the motion. That's a very important part of procedure, which probably a lot of people don't understand, is why we have a seconder. If we didn't have the seconder and someone just stood up and moved the motion and maybe spoke for 5 minutes for it, and then no one else wanted to talk about it, well, we've wasted 5 minutes in a meeting, and we want to try and make the best use of our time in our meetings. Now, also in this case, a chair has the right in meeting procedure to accept a motion without a seconder. And you think, well, that's crazy. Why can that happen when you just said you have to have a seconder? Well, that's because the chair has a slightly more important role in a meeting because they are charged with making sure the meeting works effectively. And there may well be something that the chair knows that not everyone else knows about a particular motion that's come up. So they can deem that that's an important item of business, and they understand that maybe there's nobody in the room who wants to put their name to it as a seconder. So he will say, look, it's unusual practice, but I'm going to accept that motion and call the mover to speak to it. So again, you see the logic for that. You should not have a meeting procedural rule which says you must have a seconder if there's something like I just explained about having to discuss something that no one wants to second. And it's the same as most people are aware that if you raise a motion, you don't have to vote for it. Some people think, well, you should. Well, when you really think about it logically, why should you? Let's say you feel really passionate about something, and then halfway through the debate, someone brings forward an argument that really changes your mind. For you to be committed to vote for that motion, even when your mind has been changed, just doesn't make sense. So again, you can see the logic of that. The third thing I wanted to mention is actually the bottom one on that list. It's the casting vote. And this is, I'll go back to the methods of voting first. Most of you would be aware that in meeting procedure, we've generally in a friendly environment, we call for a vote on the voices, and then the motion is either declared or lost depending on how the chair reads the voices. Normally in a friendly meeting, that'll be most people in favour of most things. So it's generally an efficient way of running a meeting just to do it that way. Meeting procedure says if someone's not happy with the count of the voices, then they can stand and say, Mr. Chair, I request that we have a show of hands because I'm not convinced that we actually had the right number of people. Then if the chairman accepts that suggestion, and he or she can not, they would do so at their peril, I would think, then they simply say, right, we'll have a vote by a show of hands. There you have a show of hands, and then the hands are counted, and then the motion's determined. Now, you might be in a room of 200 people, as I was saying before, and you have a show of hands. Well, if it's a really serious thing, you're probably going to get someone stand up and say, that's very indeterminate. I can't figure out how many people are voting for or against, Mr. Chair. I think we should have a ballot. And then that may well come in the form of a point of order, and then maybe even a motion, a procedural motion to deal with that. However, it's a third way of determining a motion. And then the vote is done by ballot. People are given slips of paper and they write yes or no, and they're gone and they're counted. And that's the best way of doing a vote, determining a vote, obviously, by ballot. And there's no question, as long as you don't get a tie, hopefully, that's the best way of actually finally determining a ballot. There's no real easy way to go to any fourth stage there. So again, you can see the logic for that. There's a reason for, first of all, having the voices, because you don't want to waste time by going through the process of a show of hands. If you know that most people are in the room are in favour of the motion, or it's a small meeting, same with the show of hands. If you know you can do it efficiently, do that rather than go to the trouble of having a ballot unless you absolutely have to. Now, the last thing I wanted to mention about logic and meeting procedure is the casting vote. Most of us know that a casting vote, every chair in most organisations, certainly in Toastmasters, all chairman roles have a casting vote. And general convention, they don't have to actually do this, but general convention says that if they have a casting vote, they should vote to not change things, to maintain the status quo. That's a general understanding. There have been cases where I've seen that not used in local government, and it hasn't been very well accepted, I can tell you. Some of you may well have seen it as well, but generally people do maintain the status quo if they're in that position of having to cast the casting vote in a meeting. But the example I wanted to raise to you tonight, that most of you may or may not be aware, that every chair, certainly in Toastmasters and in the Rotary Club that I was involved in, and most other general community organisations, most organisations also allow the chair to have what they call a deliberative vote, which is what we all have as members. That is a deliberative vote. When you are asked to cast your vote, that's your deliberative vote. And people don't understand that the chairman has a deliberative vote as well as the casting vote. And you might think, well, that's a bit silly. Why do they get two votes? Well, that's where the convention to maintain the status quo comes into its own. Because if the chairman casts his vote and there's still a tie, well, they get a casting vote, and then they have to break that tie, because you want to break the tie in situations like that. But if you don't know about that, and something important comes up, and this was the example I was going to give you about it. The Rotary Club that I was involved in one year had a president who was passionately in favour of a project for the club to do, and there were just as half the club was fairly passionately against not the project, but not doing it at this time. So this particular meeting of the Rotary Club, it actually did come to a tie, and the chair of the meeting was the president. And it just all happened so quickly. They spoke for and against, and then all of a sudden, no one realises that you're going to get a tie. It's not a usual thing. But what happened was they called for the vote. There were 20 people for and there were 20 people against. And poor old Gus knew the convention. He said, I have to vote, the casting vote, to maintain the status quo. The project is not going ahead. He did not know about a deliberative vote. Had he known about a deliberative vote, there wouldn't have been a tie, and his project would have gotten through. So you can see how understanding these elements of meeting procedure are so important, and can be so important, particularly out there in the non-Toastmasters world, and how logical they are. And just talking about the casting vote again, some people say, well, why should you vote to maintain the status quo? Why do you have to do that? Is it just a convention? That's because and I'm sure it's the same all over the world in Western countries, and I think it would be in America as well. If in your common law there's a casting vote, then if there's a tie in common law, if there's a tie in a voting situation, in common law there is no casting vote. So we have that as something which is allowed to meetings and organisations, so we can get out of a situation where we want to resolve something because there's a tie. So we are given that opportunity to have a casting vote to break the tie one way or another, rather than have an impasse. But in common law, there is no casting vote. And if there's a tie, whatever's being proposed is automatically lost, or automatically doesn't go ahead. So again, you see the logic of that, and that's the logic of the casting vote. So I think I've covered most of the things I wanted to talk about tonight, but I just want to go back to the process that I'm really encouraging you all to do is to have more business sessions in your club, to rotate the roles of chair, as Vince said he did in the Melbourne Club, give people the experience and learn by doing. It's the simple, most effective way of learning. We do it in our normal public speaking, everything else we do in Toastmasters. Learn by doing, by having more business sessions in your club. I wouldn't suggest, Vince, that we make them 45 minutes long or 3-hour Toastmasters meetings. I know some clubs have a regular 10-minute business session and they have no time extensions. So the meeting goes for 10 minutes. If there's something happening at 10 minutes, bang, the gavel is down and the business being discussed automatically transposes to the next meeting. Some clubs I know have a business session at every meeting and they meet every week and they're 5 minutes and every single item on that agenda is timed. If there's a report from the treasurer, it's 30 seconds. And they're timed and they don't get any more than that. And that's good practice. I'm not suggesting we all should do that. I think the 10-minute guide is a good guide to have in regular Toastmasters meetings because that fits our general sort of programming in my experience. So I encourage you to look at that. Then you will have meetings like this, ladies and gentlemen, not like the one that I showed you before, nice, orderly, efficient, productive meetings by following meeting procedure, because you will have learned it all and practiced it all in your Toastmasters club. Timing is very important in business sessions. As I said a moment ago, you've got to make sure that it doesn't run over time. Only allow extensions of time is my recommendation if they're absolutely necessary, because that's how business sessions and meeting procedure get a bad name, by going over time and getting out of control. I'm sure we've all had that experience. So just be very wary of the timing. And I know we all are as Toastmasters in our normal meetings, but certainly it is the case with business sessions as well, including how long people have got to speak and being very tough on that and making sure people don't speak over time when they're speaking to a motion for or against. Have rules about that, guidelines, and make sure that doesn't happen. Now, I was going to say if we had time, and look at that for timing, red light. So we don't have time to have a demo, but my final recommendation in having your business session in your club meetings is to have mock motions. Don't ever have a business session where you close the meeting on the green light. If you've got 3 minutes of a business session left, have someone raise a mock motion and get into the practice of moving motions and amendments, points of order, procedural motions. It's the only way you can learn is to learn by doing. So we're not going to have a demo meeting tonight, but I encourage you to have more business sessions in your club and to make them demonstration meetings of how you can use and learn meeting procedure. Mr. Chair.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Bob. That was fantastic. I'm sure we all learned a lot. That was a good and involving presentation. Excellent. Okay, folks, now we have a brief break. According to our agenda, we should be back at 8:05. Let's make it a 10-minute break. Okay, so back at 8:10 on the dot, and then we will be introducing to you our very special guest speaker, Mr. Matt Kinsey, DTM. So the next part of our evening is with Matt Kinsey, and I will hand over to Kevin to give us a good introduction to Matt, in case you don't know who Matt is. Very unlikely, I should think.
So I'm making the assumption that everyone has read Matt's bio, and I'm not going to do the traditional one. They say that an introduction for a speaker shouldn't pump up expectations too much in case they fail to meet those expectations. But how can you downplay someone who is a father, a grandfather, a husband, a musician, playing 8 instruments, a business owner, a Boy Scouts volunteer, a cycling enthusiast, and self-professed bookworm? Matt's first Toastmaster meeting wasn't to help with nerves in front of an audience. It was the offer of free food. So VPPRs are out there. I hope you're taking notes. What drove Matt was what I call the magic of Toastmasters, the evaluation, and how not to only find improvement, but to give and receive commendations. Matt doesn't stop learning. He's an open mindset, which gives him an advantage. Not to mention never passing up a speaking opportunity to inspire his audience to have the courage to do the next right thing, apologies to Frozen, and empowering others to make a difference. Before Matt starts his session today, I'd like to repeat his words about our organization. I have learned that to be the most successful, you need to lead with your heart and not your head. He says there is no finer program than Toastmasters for helping build their self-confidence, communication, and leadership skills. Please welcome our International President, Distinguished Toastmaster, Matt Kinsey.
Good evening, everyone. And Bob Kirchner, good to see you. I haven't seen Bob in quite a while. Sue asked me to speak about what is life like on the board of directors. And I think part of the role of the international president is to what I call, it's not my words, our CEO, Dan Rex, used this word to describe me. And what he said is you humanize the role of the international president. And what does that mean? Look, I'm a member like anybody else. Okay, I have a different scope of responsibility, just like Kevin and Graham have different scopes of responsibility, and Alicia as district officers in their respective districts. Those are important roles that people have, and they've just got a larger scope of responsibility, slightly larger scope of authority with what little authority any of us have in Toastmasters, even me. My authority is very limited. So I just want to talk about, the role of the international president, the role of the board of directors in Toastmasters, and this is just going to be very conversational. So there's no slides. I'm just going to be talking about some of my experiences. So the first time I decided that I might want to run for the board of directors at some point was actually when I was, at the time, Lieutenant Governor, I'll say it the Australian way, Lieutenant Governor of Marketing, which is now the Club Growth Director. And this was in 2010, and it was at mid-year training. So I went to mid-year training outside of Dallas, Texas, real close to where, if any of you watch American football, real close to where the Dallas Cowboys Stadium was at the time. And at the end of the 2-day mid-year training, a woman came up to me and said, Matt, have you thought about what you're going to do after you complete your years on the district trio? And I said, no, I haven't thought about it. And she said, you need to. And that was all she said. And that woman was Lark Doley, who was international president a few years ago. And Lark's been an important inspiration for me. So why did she say that she saw something in me? I don't know. I think I know from future conversations. I don't know what it was I said that weekend that triggered it. But what Toastmasters board does is Toastmasters has its several responsibilities. So one of those, probably the most important, is what I call governance. And so governance is us checking on our own rules and determining what the policies and protocols of the organization are going to be. So all of those things about, you can do this as district director and the program quality director does this, and everything else that happens at the district level, those are all policies. Our policies about discipline, our policies about membership dues. All of those policies are determined by the board of directors. So the board of directors is composed of 20 members, 19 of whom have a vote. All right. So our chief executive officer, if you say the board is 19 members, you're excluding our CEO. Our CEO is a board member, as in most corporations. The CEO is a board member. Our CEO, by rule, does not have a vote in the meeting, but he does have a voice in the meeting. So he participates in debate. He provides background information. He helps with the international president set the agenda. He is the voice of the team at World Headquarters, and he is the only person that the board of directors employs directly. All right. So we're determining the policies. The second thing we're doing is we're looking at the finances of the organization. Now, we don't develop the budget, but we provide oversight on the budget. So the board of directors has to approve the budget. Once the budget is approved, it is the policy of the organization, and we help set direction. You know, are we going to allow the organization to budget for a loss for a year? And over the last couple of years, because of the pandemic, we have budgeted for a loss, and that we had some reserves built up, and very likely we will budget for a loss again this coming year. All right. We have to take care of capital improvements at the organization. At some point, you know, we bought a building that was 10 years old. At some point, we're going to have to replace the roof. Okay. You know, it's a flat roof. Flat roofs last 15 to 16 years. We've been in the building 5 years. We're probably going to have to replace the roof in the next few years. That's something the board of directors would approve as part of the budget and determine where that money comes from. The third piece of it is we are the group that oversees the CEO. So I said the board of directors through the executive committee, I'm not going to say manages the CEO, but we employ the CEO. And so as a board member, I don't call up somebody on staff and say, you need to do this. As a board member, the board tells the CEO, the board wants this done, and the CEO determines who on the staff will do that. And if it doesn't get done, the board is responsible for the accountability for the CEO, for providing feedback to the CEO so that the performance can improve, and ultimately decides whether the CEO will continue to be the CEO or whether we'll look for a new one. And that has happened, you know, a few times. When Dan came in, the former CEO, the board made a decision that she would no longer be the CEO. Our previous executive director at the time retired. So the board was very comfortable with his performance up to the point he decided to retire. So those are things, and it's a really challenging situation, you know, because anytime anything negative happens, there are members who are like, oh, the CEO's got to go. And if you look at our Facebook group, you'll see some of that today. It's a lot more complex than one thing happening or a couple of things happening to determine that. And what the board has to do is they're asking a couple of questions. One is, do we have confidence in the ability of the CEO to overcome the current challenges and to deliver on the vision of the board and the mission of the board? The fourth thing, which relates to the vision mission, is we're the strategic planning arm of the organization. So we set the strategy and direction with the feedback of the members. All right. So we talk to members, and every member of the board, including the CEO, is a member of a Toastmasters club. We have a very successful Toastmasters club at World Headquarters. You know, he's not there every week. He's got other things to do. But every member of the board participates in meetings nearly on a weekly basis. In the US, most clubs meet weekly. I know that many clubs in Australia, it seems like the majority meet fortnightly. I do know what that word means. All right. Many Americans don't, but I know many of you meet, you know, fortnightly, or some meet twice a month. But it's very common in North America for clubs to meet weekly. So, you know, I belong to 3 clubs, and I'm probably at, you know, 5, 6 Toastmasters meetings a month. So I see what's going on a daily basis. Our board members are expected to participate in pathways. All right. I've completed 6 paths. I'm working on my 7th. So we're participating in the program just as every other member is. And so we're providing direction. And the last major thing we did was introduce the new strategic plan. And that's a fun exercise, because that's really like, where are we going? What's important to us? And so what is we said is important to us? One is the educational experience of our members. We want to make sure that clubs are having really good meetings. What does that mean? Well, it means that members are attaining their goals. It means that there's really good evaluations. It means the meetings are well run. using some of the techniques that we talked about earlier, but having a good set agenda. And I think most importantly, having fun in the meetings. All right. Yeah, every club develops their own culture, but if you're not having fun, who's going to come? I'm not going to go to a meeting that's not fun, especially one that I'm spending extra money to go to and I'm choosing to participate in. You know, do I go to some work meetings that aren't fun? Absolutely. Okay. But do I go to some board meetings that aren't fun? Yes, that has happened. But I don't want to go to a Toastmasters meeting, especially a club meeting, that's not fun. So that's what we're looking for there. We are looking to improve our operational excellence. So one of those areas we know already is pathways. And there's a project underway to improve the pathways interface, as well as to improve the pathways content and structure of the structure of the projects. And there'll be more updates on both of those projects over the next few months. And we'll share more as we get closer to making a change. Now, those are not quick projects. Okay, so don't expect something later this year. But we also review strategic alliances. So if you did not see the announcement, late this year or early next year, very early, we've announced a partnership with a company called Udly. Udly provides artificial intelligence feedback on your speeches. Things like how many words per minute were you speaking? Things like filler words. It picks up everything. And Udly is by far the best implementation of this that we've seen at the board of directors. And that is going to be available to all members at no additional cost. So rather than running from this artificial intelligence and not incorporating it and not being in the US, we would say Blockbuster Video, who didn't see Netflix coming and you know, wouldn't change their methods. We're changing things to do that. Now, there's a great question here. Okay, do the board get paid wages? No. The only one on the board who's paid any money is our chief executive officer, because that's his career. All right. Everybody else on the board volunteers their time. And we all have jobs, or we've had some on the board over the years who were independently wealthy, but the vast majority, you know, have jobs. I own a business. We do get maybe half of our board members, you know, own their own business, but our board members today, Morag runs a nonprofit organization in Germany. That's a branch of an organization out of the UK. Roddy works for AT&T, which is one of the largest telecom companies in the United States and the world. Richard just started a new position. I don't know a lot about it, but I know he just started a new job. Aletta is a business owner like I am, different business, but she's a business owner and, you know, business consultant. We have people on the board who work in cybersecurity. Ben works in banking from Australia. We have people who, we've had pharmacists on the board. And Wisha is a research scientist in neuroscience, a true neuroscientist. She's studying things like Alzheimer's and dementia and other brain disorders. So, you know, if you say, well, it doesn't take a neuroscientist, well, we've got one on the board. Okay. So all sorts of walks of life. Board meetings. Does the board liaise much with districts to get information about the quality of meetings? Absolutely. So this year, I will be visiting on-site districts in Pakistan, Brazil, East Africa, United States, and Mexico. So I'll be visiting 6 districts this year in person, and I'll probably do 40 to 50 virtual visits based on my current pace. I'm doing 3 to 4 a month minimum. I did 7 1 month. So far, you're the 4th this month. So I'll easily hit 50 or 60 visits to districts. And our other board members attend. Well, most of our board members are going to attend 2 or 3 districts this year. And we bring that information in, and we talk to district leaders on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis on region advisor calls. So, and thank you, Graham posted that. And I do see one other quote here. How do everyday members participate in providing feedback into the strategy and operational improvements in a structured and meaningful way? You know, that is something we're continuing to try to improve on, but anyone can send an email to boardcontact@toastmasters.org, and that lands in, if it's a board issue, that lands on my desk this year. Okay. Now, quite often we'll get things sent into board contact that really aren't the board's purview. All right. So if you're looking for help because you think you earned your DTM and they're saying no, you're missing a requirement, I'm not going to intervene in that. We have staff who looks at that and makes sure all the boxes are checked. Okay. If you're having a problem with a member in your club, well, the club's responsible for that. And so that will get directed to the club services team at World Headquarters to assist you in dealing with that. Same thing with districts. Oh, you know, so-and-so area director disappeared. Well, the district director needs to deal with that. And we have a district growth and support team that will support the district director and how to approach that. But things that are related to the board functions that I've talked about do end up on the international president's desk. And most of the time, they eventually end up before the board. Okay. And we discuss them as a board and we determine what we're going to do. We also do listening groups. So we did some listening groups with members last year. We're in the middle of a group of listening groups with past board members right now to get their feedback. So we use some formal methodologies like surveys, and we use some informal methodologies like listening groups, where we just get on the phone. We've got a topic that we're talking to our members about. Are our meetings fun? Well, sometimes they are. It's fun talking about strategy. Is the budget fun? Well, for some people, yes. Some people love getting into numbers and diving into it. And we present everything on our budget. We present all the spreadsheets that you're used to seeing, but then there's also narratives. So that those people who are more readers and more I'm not going to say high level thing, that they think more broadly about it rather than just the numbers. There's a narrative, there's a story that goes along with why what each department's working on, why they're wanting to add staff this year, you know, those types of stories and what they're trying to accomplish in their progress. So that's kind of what life is like on the board. So I'm going to share a couple of stories of challenging times that we've had and why I'm really proud to be associated with the board. So it was March of 2019, and we were monitoring this new illness that was coming out that we were hearing news about from January in Wuhan, China. The pandemic that looks like we may be coming out of. And we were obviously concerned. We had members' health to be concerned about, but we didn't know how big it was going to be. Clearly, so it's going to last 3 months, 6 months. Is it going to last a year? I never imagined that 3 years later we would still be coping with this. The National Basketball Association, we were sitting in an executive committee meeting before a board of directors meeting, and we get a notice that the National Basketball Association has canceled the rest of the NBA season, has put their season on hold. And we were at dinner and we looked at each other and went, this just got huge. And we immediately got on the phone and we called every board member who was getting ready to travel to board meetings and told them, if you don't feel comfortable, don't come. And we had our first hybrid board meeting with 24 hours notice. All right, so we've got plans, everyone's flying in, and all of a sudden, half of our board members are not flying in because they didn't feel comfortable. But I was so proud of our board because the decisions we made, the agenda completely changed overnight. We rearranged everything And we started talking about how do we protect our members? And that was the first conversation. That conversation, nobody brought up money. Nobody brought up membership. Nobody brought up district recognition. It was, what do we do to make sure our members are safe? And we made the decision to allow all clubs to meet online immediately and until further notice. It was the right decision. We communicated that. And then we had wonderful leaders around the world who volunteered their time to help people figure out how to go online with club meetings. And then Zoom exploded as a company, the platform we're on today. Only after we dealt with that did we start to deal with the other issues. The second major set of issues was, how do we do the business of the organization? Because our governing document said that business meetings were face-to-face. There was no provision for an online business meeting. So that was the second set of decisions that we made, were about things like speech contests, district annual business meetings, club business meetings, and allowed those to come online. And then we started talking about the impact on our membership numbers and revenue. So we did things, I think, in the right order. We took care of our members first, we took care of the day-to-day operations of the organization second, and then we took care of the finances to go forward. Later that year in June, the international president at the time, Deepak Menon, came to me with the committee I was on, which was reviewing policies for the organization, and said, we need to figure out what we're going to do with online clubs. Are they allowed to be part of a district? Because our governing documents at the time said no online clubs as part of a district. You can't start a club that's designed to meet exclusively online. Everything in our governing documents around districts was based on geography. And it makes sense. You know, you look at District 73, it's got a specific geography. You know, it's got Melbourne, it's got Adelaide, it's got, you know, South Australia and Tasmania. All right. And I may be missing a couple areas. If I am, I apologize, you know, but I know those are the major areas of the district. So those are areas. You don't have Perth. You used to have Perth, but you don't have Perth anymore. That's its own district. All right. And there are other districts in Australia and throughout Region 12 that have geographic boundaries, which makes complete sense. I got this assignment in June, and then our committee started working on it, and we had to present something in August. Okay, very short time frame to just make a very huge decision. And what I was so proud of with the board at that time was we made decisions knowing that we didn't have all the answers. Now think about that, okay? I am someone who is not comfortable generally making decisions on very little information. I'm not. I'm a data person. I like data to back it up. Now, I don't rely just on data. You know, I'll be honest, usually I want data to kind of like back up what my instincts are telling me. But there was no data as to what was going to happen. How long was this going to last? And we had to make decisions without that data. And so we started, and this is a great technique if you're making a big decision, we started with principles. What are the principles of the organization? One of the first principles we came up with was that a club is a club is a club, and how they meet is an attribute of that club. It is not a definition of that club. So we try to change the language, not say online meetings. It's meetings and clubs that meet online. It's not a hybrid club. It's a club that meets in a hybrid format. It's not an in-person club. It's a club that meets in person. And that change made the rest of our decisions very easy. So when the question came up, well, should districts be allowed to start online clubs? Well, should districts be allowed to start clubs? Oh, absolutely. Well, then clearly that means they should be able to start online clubs. And so when you're working through a sticky issue, and it's a technique I use all the time in decision making, is what are the principles? Because the principles, defining those principles makes the rest of the decision-making a lot easier. All right. And this is whether you're working at the district level or the club level. We continue to make decisions and we continue to wrestle with things. You know, what's the future of the speech contest? It's very interesting because what we heard before the international convention was, oh, the speech contest is not fair to those online because we're doing a hybrid meeting. Okay. What did we end up with in our World Championship finals? We ended up with 4 speakers online, 4 speakers in person, and of the semifinals, 4 of the 5 hybrid participants advanced to the finals. Think about that. What we're hearing from contestants now is that those who were participating online had an advantage over those who were on site. It's just very interesting how the reality turned out different. What's the future of that? We don't know. I mean, we know what it is for this coming year. We'll probably be hybrid again, but long-term, do we continue to have 1 speech contest? Do we have 2 speech contests? Those are the types of things that the board is struggling with now. And those are fun topics, but we're also struggling with things such as, you know, our membership numbers that are still down. How do we recover those? What are the strategies? Working with the district leaders. And we are also the group that made the decision to have a hybrid convention this year. And I will tell you, despite a number of people coming down with COVID, I've talked to most of those people who got COVID. And I'll tell you the criticism about having the convention in person and those getting COVID is not coming from those who got COVID. It's coming from those who stayed home. Those who got COVID, everyone I've spoken to has told me it was worth it to go and be with our fellow Toastmasters. So those are just some of the experiences on the board. And I just really want you to understand, we're just a group of people who have access to some data, and we have life experience, work experience, Toastmasters experience that puts us in a position where the members have entrusted us to be their voice from around the world, representing 14 different regions, representing 5 executive officers, and our CEO representing our staff to make these decisions on top of the board. We're not really that different at a fundamental level from anybody on this call. So one of my encouragements for those who are in district office, those who are thinking about being in district office, at some point, you know, not when you're club growth director, maybe not even a program quality director, but at some point, start thinking about, is service on the board of directors something that I would like to pursue? And do the research. Reach out to your current international director, Ben McCormick. Ask Ben about his experience, what it took for him to be prepared, because we need quality people on the board who have a passion for the program, who have the skills and the experience doing board work to participate meaningfully in the board, and who gain the trust of their fellow members to be represented. Thank you so much. I know we're going to be going into questions just a minute, and I really appreciate being here. And I hope this informal discussion, rather than just some kind of slide presentation, really helped you guys understand more like what life is like on the Toastmasters board of director. Back to you, Mr. Toastmaster.
That'll be me. Thank you very much, Matt, for spending some time with us and telling us about your experience at the highest levels of the organization. It's an insight that we wouldn't get very often. We really, really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. So thank you. The next part of our evening will be a question panel, which will be chaired by Sue Pederick, my co-chair with the education and training part of District 73. So Sue, I'll throw it right over to you.
Thank you so very much, Graham. Now I'd love to pin our panel up so that we have Matt Kinsey, Bob Kirchner, and the wonderful Vince Camilleri. these are your panel this evening or this morning for some. And I would love to have some wonderful questions put through in the chat box or potentially asked as well. So if you put them in the chat box initially, then we'll certainly ask you to speak to your question as well as we go forward. But I've got a couple of things to just start off with.
Tom
And
has his, sorry, Sue, Tom has his hand raised straight
I
away.
can see that, but I'll just throw one question out. I love for Vince lying on the table, and I just wondered if you can quickly remind us about lying on the table, what that means. Sound. Oh, we've lost you, Vince.
Can you hear me now? I'm sorry.
Yes, all
Yeah.
good. Thank you.
So basically what that means is a motion is a procedural motion puts the motion on the table. In other words, it becomes ineffective until it's taken up next time and voted on. So nothing can be done with that motion. It's just lying there.
Terrific. And it can be revisited and then revisited again multiple times if it can't be resolved. Vince, there we go. It can be revisited again multiple times if needed.
Yes, yes.
Yep.
Absolutely. So that's why it's lying on the table, lying, waiting to be dealt with.
Terrific. Tom Wild, do you have a question for our panel?
Yes, thank you, Sue. Just a question. It has been mentioned, this has been a great session on parliamentary procedure or meeting procedures. It should be called, well, I agree with that. But one thing that is being discussed in Australian districts is that we follow Renton's rules. And as most of you know, Nick Renton passed away about 10 years ago. So his book hasn't been updated. And some are saying, well, should we go towards Robert's rules where America and Canada and a few other countries follow it? Even Western Australia apparently follows Robert's rules. Should we go that way or have a combination, a hybrid between Renton's and Robert's rules? I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, well, from Bob, especially from District 90 and also from 73.
Tom, I think my view is that we should stick with what we know. And I think it was interesting, Matt put a comment in the chat about casting votes, and that I use that as an example of using what we know, in that we're also used to the casting vote. For example, in our procedure, there would probably be quite a lot of differences between Roberts and Renton's. I've had a squeeze at Roberts and I got a bit confused. I was as confused at that time that I was when I started reading Renton's, but I've learned about Renton's, and I think a lot of people in our part of the world have done the same. And I think to embrace the idea of changing to something totally new when you don't really have to, and that's the question, obviously. And Gary Wilson, who is an esteemed past international director and parliamentarian expert in District 70/90, has written a very long explanation as to why we shouldn't change. And his main reasoning is that Renton's is based on Australian law, whereas Roberts is not. And the one that if we were going to be using anything, we should be using a publication called Joski's, which is not really viable because it's so expensive. It's even more expensive than Renton's got to be. But if we were going to go to an authority, that's the one we should be using. But what Gary has done, and some of you would be aware, he has actually published an abridged version of Renton's, the Australian chairman. Very cheap to buy as well, I might say. He's not making any money out of it. He's just printing it and selling it for cost. And this is 28 pages of readable, valuable information for meetings based on Renton's. Renton's itself is 250 pages. So you can see this one is a lot more easy to use. And I think if we were to adopt anything, and I think Gary's idea was that we might some of our districts may well look at adopting that as a how-to guide. Certainly be much more feasible for clubs to have something like this rather than try and get every member to be reading Renton's, which is, as you say, not actually available anyway. So sorry for a long-winded answer, but I think we really should stick with what we know so long as we can justify that in the terms of currency.
If I could just add to that, the American version has got 4 motions. So it's got a main motion and it's got subsidiary motions, privileged motions, and incidental motions. It's a different system, and with their motions, it's very orderly. When you're moving procedural motions, they've got to be moved in sequence, one after another. And I'm sure that Matt knows more about this than I do, the privileged motions. So it is a different system. It's very orderly, but ours, I think, is a simpler system. And you only change systems when your environment changes. And I question how much has our environment changed that would require a brand new system. And I think that's a real consideration.
Yeah, I will just say it's always interesting having, when we have someone on the board from Australia. And so Leslie Stork and I had quite a few conversations on nuanced differences between Renton's and Roberts. But in terms of the day-to-day operations, there's very little difference. So when you start diving into it, I mean, like, I'll give you an example of a privilege motion is a point of personal privilege. Okay, I have a point of personal privilege. That means we need to take a break to take care of bodily functions. All right, that's a nice way of saying, I need to get up and go, but I rise to a point of personal privilege. Well, that's a privilege motion, okay? And that's basically saying we need to take a break for a few minutes. But it is very orderly. It's one of the most well-established rules of order around the world. And so if you want to serve on the board of directors, you will need to learn Roberts, but for a day-to-day business meeting, the 10% that we use, would be very easy to come across from Renton's.
Graham, you have your hand up. Would you like to ask?
Yeah, I'm probably one of the rare Australians that actually owns a copy of Roberts. It's about 4 or 5 centimeters thick.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a lot more in it than any club and probably any district would ever need.
Mm-hmm.
And the document I put up for people to download is about 1 and a bit pages, I think. That's got the basic rules that a club would need to operate and run a meeting according to a reasonable set of rules. So Roberts is fantastic, greatly detailed. You could run the United Nations General Assembly with that, which is sort of a little bit further up than the average club or district is.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd strongly endorse Roberts, and I'd love to get a copy of that book that you're waving around, Bob. Are you going to post the details of where we can get that? Thank you.
So Graham, were you strongly endorsing Roberts or Renton's?
Oh, sorry, Renton. Did I say Roberts? Oh, no.
Yes, you did.
Yes.
Just checking if...
I've just had too many of these.
So Roberts actually produces two books that are official publications. They have Roberts Rules and Roberts Rules of Order in brief. And in brief
got that as well.
is the book that's 4 or 5 centimeters thick. Okay, the full rules are probably 7 to 8 centimeters thick. All right, so yeah, it covers everything. There's the chapter to get in the National Association of Parliamentarians covers 12 chapters out of the in brief book.
Terrific. Kevin, you have some questions in the chat box. Would you like to ask yours?
My understanding is that the reason why we have business process was that when Smedley originally created the organization, he wanted to teach those people that it was focused on to give confidence to understand how government turned around and made decisions. In Australia, I won't joke about how our government fails to make decisions, but they have a process which is very different to Renton's or Roberts or anything else, and there are simplified versions of that. Do we? I know Vince said we don't fix what isn't broken, and our current environment, but shouldn't we be looking to try and adopt whatever regionally the government is using and how they go about managing process, rather than sticking with a process that some boards may or may not use, some companies may or may not use around how they do certain things? And I'm happy to start with Matt and work around to Vincent Bob.
You know, okay, so I can give my example from how the U.S. Congress operates. All right, the rules in the U.S. Congress are arcane. Okay, they're almost mystical with some of them, and the authority that the parliamentarian of the U.S. Congress has is substantial. All right, so I'm not sure that we need to look at that. I think we're getting the basic understanding of how decisions are made, regardless of what parliamentary authority, you know, a club operates under, whether it's Renton's or Joski's or Robert's rules, which are probably the three largest, okay, three most widely used. So whether it's any of those three, I think we get a sense of how government makes decisions without getting into the arcane rules that govern. So like yielding time. So in the US Congress, someone can yield their time to another member, all right, because they have very strict limits on debate. You can't do that under Robert's rules. Okay, that there's no yielding time to somebody else. No, you got your time and you can't give it away to somebody else. So that's just one example. That doesn't make sense in most business meetings. It can make sense at the government level.
Does it make sense to add business meetings and process to another project in another path somewhere?
That has been an idea that has been suggested by members, is that we look at perhaps a mini path on parliamentary procedures. Roberts is the most commonly used, so if we did one, it would be on Roberts.
Yep.
I don't know that we would do one on Renton's, but there might be a section on it. Someone asked me about it. I said, look, I would have a section on just some of the other ones that are out there, so people understand that there's not just Roberts. But for the most part, I would say from a day-to-day, from a club meeting, in terms of the actual implementation of each of those in a club, there would be very little difference.
Yep. I think an elective, the same way that we have mentoring, would be a great way to take it forward, and coaching. So we've gone down that path of how to have that extra learning. It would be really good.
Sure.
Thank you. Anything from Vince or Bob of the same?
I was just going to say, Kevin, that it's an interesting question you raise. I've just done a quick search to see what meeting procedure governs Parliament in Australia, for example, and I've come across numerous pages that they all seem to have different rules depending on whether they're Senate committees or what. So I think it's interesting. I can't answer the question, but I think it'd be interesting to do a little bit of research and come back with some ideas. My feeling is that, a bit like Matt was saying, the simplicity of the dumbed down Roberts or Renton's is really much more effective, and as Graham was saying as well, to have something which is usable is really more important than even what is right. You know, when you're making a decision, it's important to make a decision than not to make a decision in many cases. So, interesting question. I would suggest we probably don't really need to worry too much about it within Toastmasters, but for the transferable skill of having the benefit of that outside of Toastmasters could be very interesting.
There was a fascinating observation on the radio from a British politician talking around what's going on at the moment in the UK. And he said that the beauty of the British Constitution is that most of it isn't written down.
Oh, okay, yeah. I can imagine that. They're responsible for the previous question, by the way, the Brits.
Yes, they are.
So we have
Yeah,
a
on that-
question from Joseph Vu. Joseph, are you still there? Would you like to ask your question to Bob?
Yeah, I'm still here. I have to go to another room. Hi. So my question is really, I have not seen these parliamentary procedures being used at my workplace, and I've seen this word parliamentary procedures from Toastmasters since I joined, but I was very reluctant to adopt it or learn more about it because I haven't seen it used anywhere else, and I thought it would be used mainly by politicians, which I'm not interested in becoming. So my question is really, are these procedures applicable to certain types of teams or organizations only, or can I adopt them for my workplace? Has anyone ever adopted them for their workplaces?
I think that's an interesting question too. That my answer to that would be that I think many of the principles that we learn and follow in meeting procedure are principles that we can use in workplace meetings, and certainly strict meeting procedure, if that was necessary, would certainly be advantageous in certain circumstances. There'd be many where meetings are probably less formal, and that goes for general meetings as well. I think one of the things I didn't have time to talk about in my little session was that if you're in a meeting which is relatively informal, you don't want to let it get totally out of hand, but you probably don't want to be ultra strict either with meeting procedure. And that's where the leave of the meeting comes into it from a logical point of view. There's allowance in Renton's to be informal about something where, hey, everyone seems in agreement. So if everyone's happy, can we just do this? That's the leave of the meeting. And you don't have to go through the involved process of doing it with the motion and movers and seconders and all the rest of it. So I think the principles of what we learn in meeting procedure can be very beneficial in a workplace. And if you take it away from the meeting situation, what I have learned in meeting procedure and Toastmasters more broadly speaking as well is the ability, or what I've been able to develop is the ability to run good discussion groups. And I think that those sort of things of giving people equal time and everyone having the opportunity to speak in a workplace meeting, for example, they are powerful skills that you can develop by using meeting procedure as well. So I would suggest, yes, principles, maybe not the strict procedure, but yes, if necessary, but certainly the principles can be very beneficial.
Yeah. So if I could add on to that, it's about decision making. So how are decisions made in your company? If you have a democratic process of making decisions, then Robert's rules could certainly benefit you. If you have a more traditional business making decision where the team leader or manager or CEO is asking for input, and then that individual makes the decision, Robert's rules is not really going to help you, other than some of the principles like having an agenda, setting times on it. Those are great business meeting practices, whether you're following a rule of order or not.
I have personally found it very helpful, certainly in my own business, to use some of Renton's rules in using motion. Firstly, you've got to role model the language so people understand it, so they don't find it threatening or confusing. And then when they adopt the language, it becomes easier to have a conversation. And I take Bob's comment about moving into a committee of the whole so you can relax the rules a bit. But I have, you've always got to assess the environment and work according to the environment. But I have used it in the businesses I've worked in Commonwealth government and in my own business, gently, but also introduce this camel's head in the tent, just slowly, and get people accustomed to it. And what you find is then they feel comfortable within the environment, with the language, with the behavior. But you have to sort of ease it in and let them learn and then to adopt it.
So I can see your hand up again, Graham. Would you like to ask your next question?
Not a question, so much as a comment. Bob mentioned Josky, and that book is The Law in Public Meetings. And if you want a legal interpretation, that's the book you go to. And when it says the law in public meetings, that covers meetings within companies and what's the obligation for holding a company meeting. And it also extends to meetings of organisations. If people get upset and want to get legalistic and challenge things. So that's the source there. The other thing I'd say is that arising from the James Hardy case, the judges there made some comments about companies, organisations should make decisions formally. That is, they should hold a vote and record the decision. It's not enough to have a fluffy sort of agreement that everyone can walk away from. So, or me, there's got to be made properly and recorded properly. And I've got a good article on that. I don't think I'll be able to find in time to post it, but I will make it available if anyone wants it. But yeah, that's more at the board level, but it would extend downwards within the company. There's been some very interesting work done by the Victorian Auditor General on various IT projects run by government departments and such bodies. And one of them is an absolute classic, but I have a table of the major decisions taken on a project and who made the decision. And in most cases, the decision maker is a chap by the name of no one. Now, you can't have that sort of situation. If you run a meeting, you've got to take the decisions properly by a vote if necessary and have them properly recorded in the minutes.
Yeah. Thank you, Graham. Now, as you've all been listening to each other, the leads in the panel, you've heard each other speak. Matt, did you have a question that came up when you were listening to Bob speak this evening, or something that you would love to share as a take-home message from for everyone to really nut down and say, this is the important thing that you should learn from the panel this evening?
I would say important thing to learn, and I think Bob touched on this, is the only way you're going to get comfort with this is to practice it and have fun with it. So we have a club near where I live that has a business session every meeting, and there are motions to ask somebody to make Swedish cookies, and there are motions that, you know, somebody is going to cut their hair or shave their beard, or, I mean, they're fun ones. They're obviously not binding on the members, but they practice with motions that don't matter so that they're comfortable with the motions that do matter. And I think that's a great practice that Bob talked about.
Vince, did you have a question that you started to, it inspired you to think of a question for either of the other presenters this evening?
Yeah, I'm interested. Yeah, well, when Matt was introduced, and he was introduced as a musician who plays 8 instruments, I'd like to know a little bit more about that. I'm a musician myself.
I would say I play is defined by getting a sound out of it. Okay. My proficiency, I know how to read music. I know how to read both bass and treble clef. You do not want me singing, but I started on trumpet. So most of my instruments are brass instruments. You know, so trumpet, flugelhorn, French horn. So very, very similar embouchure sizes for those instruments. But I also played a little baritone, but I've also picked up Irish flute. I play a little piano. What am I missing? I got to think through this. What am I missing? Harmonica and what's called a jutes harp, which is a mouth harp.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the instruments I know currently. My favorite instrument right now is actually right here with me, which is Irish flute. And my next one will be the bass version of the Irish flute because it plays an octave lower.
Superb. Bob, did you have some questions?
Not questions so much as good points to reference, and I really appreciated the contribution by Vince tonight. I think it's very, very important that we always keep in mind the processes of meeting procedure, and I think he presented that very well. I also think it was really good that we had the interaction tonight from quite a few of our attendees, particularly from Graham. I think the rundown of meeting procedure, even less complicated than the Australasian chairman, it was a good reference too. And we've had a fair bit of that tonight. And I have to say also, I was inspired by Matt, not quite yet to the point of putting my hand up to do an international director role, but if I was thinking about it 10% of the time before tonight's meeting, I might be thinking about it 25% of the time now.
That's good. That's increased significantly. Thank you. All right. So are there any last questions from the floor before we start to wind up this incredible panel of minds that have wonderful resources in there waiting to be tapped into?
I've got one more, if I may.
Certainly.
There was something in the chat window very early on around being able to have a voice as a member and the influence. And Matt mentioned very specifically around the conversations and the focus groups and other bits and pieces. I'm wondering if as a member, you had a particular view or an opinion that you wished to get forward, what would be the logical way or the most appropriate way to try and feed that through the service leadership model?
Yeah, so I will tell you what it is not. It is not posting it on the Toastmasters International Facebook group. Okay, that's not the way to get something done. So there are multiple methods. One is any member can email boardcontact@toastmasters.org. All right, with ideas. That certainly is an effective way. And if you have feedback on certain programs, there are emails on the contact list for pathways for our education program, on district leader training, club officer training. So they're directed to the appropriate person based on what it is from that contact page. The second way you can go is have a conversation with your district leaders. Your district leaders are represented to be they have a dual role. They're the voice of Toastmasters to the members. They're also the voice of the members to Toastmasters International, because districts are functionally part of World Headquarters team. All right. On our budget, they are departments in Toastmasters. There's only two entities in Toastmasters. There's World Headquarters, which includes districts, and there are clubs. So work with your district leaders. That's probably the most effective way. But if you have an international director visit or regional advisor visit, speak to them as well. And you can also email inter-president, and that will come to me directly. I do have an executive assistant at Toastmasters who will filter that to make sure it's something I need to look at, but she doesn't overly filter. But so those are all ways that you can get things in. But we don't have a formal process to submit something with a massive form or anything. Just send an email. And, if we've got questions about it, we'll contact you. But a lot of time we see a lot of things that appear on the board agenda that started with an email from a member.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Such valuable information. Thank you to our incredible panel, Matt Kinsey, International President, Vince Camilleri, our parliamentarian, and Bob Kirchner, our visiting guru from another district, but very full of a wealth of knowledge, and we really appreciate all of you and those who have joined us this evening. I'll now hand back to our Toastmaster. Thank you again for taking the time out, and Graham will finish up for this evening. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Vince. Thank you, Bob. And thank you, Sue, for giving us that wonderful panel session. Okay, folks, that's the end of the formal part of this evening. Thank you very much for your time coming along. We hope that you found this useful and enjoyable. I've posted several times in the chat there. There is a feedback form for you, which we would really appreciate you taking the time to fill out. It's not very long. And also we have a folder of the materials that were shared with us tonight, including the sheet that Graham posted to the chat earlier on. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming along tonight. Don't forget that we do this the third Friday of every month. And next month, oh no, it's not right on the top of my head. I can't remember what we're doing next month.
I think everyone has to come and find out. So join in and see what we've got on offer, because it's certainly a wealth of information. Third Friday of the month. Please give your feedback and certainly stay on board if you want to stay around for a little bit longer. We've had a wonderful fireside chat tonight on business meetings. They're not half as bad as what we thought they were. And also, I think from the very back of my mind, with everything that I've had go on this week, I think it's to do with conflict and resolution. I think that's our next session.
Right, yes.
Yeah, so looking forward to discussing all sorts of issues with whatever goes on in your Toastmaster world or beyond that, and how you can develop skills. We've got Tracy Green coming to help support that, amongst others as well. So Tracy Green is a past district director. So back to you again, Graham. Oh, no, actually, let's throw to Kevin, our program quality director, because Kevin is the backbone of all of the education in the district, and he's our lead and our guru here. So over to you, Kevin.
Oh, backbone is a very inappropriate pun given what happened today. I had a bit of an accident. I'm part of that conflict discussion next month. So I'm looking forward to bringing the skills that I gained in Nashville that we were talking around positive conflict resolution, and how that it doesn't have to be negative. It doesn't have to be toxic. It just needs to be open and transparent. So I'm looking forward to helping facilitate that section next month. Big thank you to Graham and Sue. Keep an eye on the District 73 calendar. All the events are up there. Danny has been doing a great job of promoting everything which is happening. So keep an eye on the Facebook page as well. And a very, very special thanks to our guests this evening for taking the time. Please bear in mind, this isn't just for the night. This is creating an amazing repository for District 73 and YouTube, where people can come back and actually look at these sessions and to get value from it. And today's certainly was very valuable. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's all. Thank you very much, folks. Have a good evening. See you next time.